And hi everybody, welcome back to Fresh Outlook. I'm TWB. Well, this week saw a medical first, a baby being functionally cured of HIV. Take a look.
In stunning medical news, the doctor for a 2-year-old HIV patient in Mississippi admits that whether it was intentional or not, they did it. They've cured the toddler of AIDS.
We have, perhaps inadvertently, but in fact, cured the child.
Dr. Hannah Gay is a pediatric HIV specialist at the University of Mississippi Medical Center and gave the child high doses of AIDS medication within hours of being born after the child's mother, previously undiagnosed with HIV, was discovered to carry the virus only during labor.
This was a case where that prevention fell through the cracks.
But it was that fast action that apparently knocked out HIV in the baby's blood before it could form hideouts in the body. 10 months after the toddler's treatment stopped, a battery of super-sensitive tests at half a dozen labs found no sign of the virus's return.
My first thought was to panic. I thought, oh my goodness, I have been treating a child who's not actually infected.
There's no guarantee the child will remain healthy, although sophisticated testing uncovered just traces of the virus's genetic material still lingering. If so, it would mark only the world's second reported cure.
All right, with that, we have some new panelists we'd like to introduce. Let's start with Dr. Allegra. Tell us where you're from.
I'm Don Allegra. I'm from northern New Jersey, and I'm an infectious disease specialist and part of a large group called ID Care, and as part of our practice, we see a number of the HIV patients in New Jersey.
Great, so love to get your insight in just a moment. Let's also introduce Kathy.
Sure, I'm Kathy O'Brien. I'm the Executive Director of Hyacinth AIDS Foundation in New Brunswick. We are New Jersey's largest AIDS service organization.
Terrific. And Dee Dee.
I'm Dee Dee Benkie, and I'm a political and cultural commentator and former aide to President Bush.
All right, great. Dr. Allegra, I want to start with you just from a medical perspective. Functionally cured. They didn't say cured, they said functionally cured. So does that mean it remains to be seen if this child will ultimately be cured?
Well, we're 2.5 years out now. The child is 2.5 years old. The mother showed up at pregnant and was not screened, which is the normal in the United States, had no prenatal care, so she was positive at birth. And they treated her very aggressively, the child, with a 3-drug regimen. And then for 18 months they treated him. And usually we continue treatment after that, but the child was lost to follow-up, came back about 5 or 6 months later.
Oh.
And now we're a year out, the child is off therapy, and they cannot detect the virus. Now,
how often will the child be checked, though, to see if it's coming back?
Well, I think they're going to probably check going forward. I think the longer we go out without the child having any evidence of virus, and I think the better off we are and the more confident we are that it's truly a cure and not just a temporary cutting down of the number of viral particles.
Okay. Kathy, that said, this breakthrough, how do you think it's going to affect other people that are currently infected with HIV?
You know, I don't know that it's going to have an impact on people who are currently infected.
Okay.
I mean, the issue with this was really it was a fluke where this baby was treated and they were able to obtain a functional cure. But for most adults who are HIV positive, the idea that the reservoir, which is what they think happened with the baby, was that the reservoir wasn't able to develop. In an adult, it's already developed.
Right.
So there's not anything, I think, from this particular case that will have an impact with adults going forward.
But what about babies moving forward?
So babies going forward, I think the impact may be felt more overseas than in the U.S. Currently, most babies in the U.S. who are born, there's a minimal amount. You know, in New Jersey, there was 1 baby born. Most babies currently are able to seroconvert because they start them on treatment regimens early.
Right, so it's more of the global impact that it could have. Dee Dee, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, I agree because I know that it's not as big of a problem in the United States as is in, of course, Africa with babies. So I think it's nice and good that our country has contributed so much money to AIDS and also to aid actually in Africa, and that should continue. And also, you know, hopefully people don't think just because this happened that we stop. And I definitely think that giving tests to people automatically whenever they go to the doctor, people should get AIDS tests just like they should get tested for the flu. That way we're able to prevent the disease and treat it.
Doctor, why do you think my question is, why are HIV drugs still so expensive? I read a stat. I believe it's one woman living with it says the lifetime cost to treat HIV is an estimated almost $380,000 according to the CDC. Why are these numbers still astronomical?
Well, I think it's with all new drugs that they are expensive, but I do have to say that most of the time the drug companies for these federal programs like ADAP that we have in New Jersey, where if you're below a certain threshold of income, many of our patients are on these programs where they get their money from the federal government, and most of the time the manufacturer do reimburse for about 1/3 of the cost. They are expensive, though. They're probably about $20,000, $25,000 a year for most of the treatment regimens. And I know in Africa, because I've been there and worked in programs there, that oftentimes we get these drugs from other countries for $75 to $100 a year. So there is a dramatic difference, but you can say that almost for every drug in America, that we do pay more than in most other countries.
So Kathy, what happens to those who can't afford the drugs?
So the program that Dr. Allegra alluded to is the AIDS the AIDS Drug Distribution Program, which is a federal program that the states support. So there is nobody in the U.S. who should not be able to access HIV medications.
But from a global perspective, I mean,
from a global perspective, PEPFAR, for instance, which is a program that President Bush supported, PEPFAR provides tons of medications over in Africa.
do we, I mean, I have a stat, but I mean, talk about the sequestration. I mean, as a doctor, are you concerned about these sequester cuts? I read, and tell me if this is accurate, basically there won't be 450,000 AIDS tests will be cut. Something like 500,000 vaccines won't be manufactured. Is that accurate?
Well, I'm not sure of the exact number. I'm not overly concerned about it because the cuts are really only 2.6%, I think, of the total budget. So I'm not overly concerned that it's going to affect either treatment or
But a cut's
screening.
a cut. I mean, you know,
Of course.
no pun intended. I mean, from a medical perspective. Dee Dee, what do you think?
Well, yeah, well, I agree that 2% or 2.5%, whatever it is unfortunate, but everything's being cut across the board. And, you know, I do believe that our country has been incredibly generous and has continued to be, and we've made great strides. And just my concern has always been that when you see a Magic Johnson that's running around and he looks healthy and he's
what
been
happened
alive
to him?
forever,
Is he-
he's still alive and
And
he looks great
Yeah.
and he's doing well. And for some of us who aren't in areas that AIDS is a problem, I think we kind of forget about it, and I think that's bad.
Have we
get
become complacent?
Yeah, I think some of us have, and I even admit, it's like, you know, I don't think I know anyone who has AIDS.
mean-
But still concerned about it, and certainly concerned about babies, and was thrilled about the story, of course. So I think we all need to be aware and realize that it's a problem.
Yeah, I think cancer is sort of more in the forefront here domestically, but it's more, you know, in the other continents where I think it still is at the forefront. What do you think, Kathy?
I think it's a huge problem in the U.S. I think complacency is a terrible issue. And I think when you look at somebody like Magic Johnson, the bottom line is that nobody knows what his level of virus was when he was diagnosed.
True.
And he could be one of the non-progressors. And I don't know, you know, your medical history is private, right? So nobody has a clue really what his medication regime is like, what he's following, but the message gets out to the broader public that, you know, he's healthy, it's not a problem anymore. And yet I watch clients struggle every single day with treatment adherence, with comorbidity issues. I've got a person I know right now who was at death's door a month ago because of HIV, and so it's clearly still a challenge. We still have 1,800 new infections in New Jersey every year, 50,000 across the country. It's still a huge issue.
You mentioned some of the struggles. What are some of the struggles and challenges that some of your clients sort of experience today that we forget about?
So the clients deal with all kinds of different comorbidity issues. So for instance, what they find now is that when somebody is on antiretrovirals for a long period of time, it causes an inflammation within their system, which can help lead to other issues. They struggle with diabetes, they struggle with heart disease, they are susceptible to some cancers. So there's other issues that definitely come into play that nobody talks about. And you know, when you mentioned you don't know anybody who has HIV or AIDS,
Or maybe I do, and I
and
don't.
maybe you do
Yeah, they
and you
talk
don't know,
about it.
stigma is still a huge issue in this country.
Real quickly, we don't have a lot of time left, but I had a problem with sort of the ethical situation, this baby being treated on this triple therapy. Usually, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if I read it was usually after 6 weeks that they start a therapy on a baby, infusions. This was immediate, 30 hours. I mean, is that right, doctor, from a medical perspective?
Well, I think the whole point is that if you start treatment early, the virus will not get established in these reservoirs that she was talking about before, and then therefore there's a possibility of cure. So we do try to treat early. This is a little bit different in that 3 very aggressive drugs were used in the beginning within 30 hours. Typically we just treat with 1 for 30 days or so, but this was a very intense treatment for a short period of time, for a relatively extended period of time, and I think that's why we had success here. But just one point about the compliance, that, we're still seeing 50,000 cases a year in the United States, and I really would like to make that point, that it has not changed since the mid-90s. So this complacency that, oh, we've got this licked now because we have drugs that can treat this infection. Sure, it's more of a chronic disease like diabetes, but it's still not a good disease to have, and still we're not at the point where we can say we're interrupting transmission in the United States.
Okay, final thought, Kathy, would you consider this an epidemic?
Absolutely. It is still an epidemic. There are HIV infection rates in New Jersey that rival sub-Saharan Africa, and we simply don't talk about it enough.
Right. Well, hopefully that's why we're talking about it today. Final word, Dee Dee?
Taryn, I think you're exactly right. We talk about cancer, a lot of other things, but for some strange reason, AIDS just isn't talked about like it used to be, so that's wrong. So it's a good thing we're talking about it now, but I agree with you.
Right, there needs to be more awareness. All right, guys, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for your invaluable insight. Fresh as always. Coming up, changing gears for sure, former NBA star Dennis Rodman. Did you hear about this? He decided to take a trip to an unlikely place. We'll tell you where. That's next. Stay with us.